Good afternoon, participants. I'm Yashwendra Singh, Executive Editor of ETCIO, and I welcome you all in this very topical webinar on Future-Proof Your Cybersecurity. Today's fast-changing technology environment comes with its own set of vulnerabilities and complex security challenges. With constant technology upgradation, shortage of IT skills, and increasing data touchpoints both within and outside the firewall, inadequate IT security poses far greater risks to business than previously imagined. In the face of new, evolving vulnerabilities, improving the enterprise security setup and building greater IT preparedness to address new security threats becomes utmost important. Enterprise security leaders, therefore, need to minimize risks, protect critical information, and effectively reduce the cost and complexity of their security infrastructure. The aim of this webinar is to help enterprise security leaders like you to better prepare to meet next generation of threats while ensuring high availability, efficiency, and brand assurance of your business. This session will throw light on how enterprise information security decision makers can simplify security management, thereby minimizing risks, protecting critical information, and effectively reducing the cost and complexity of their security infrastructure. To throw more light on this subject, we have with us today Mr. Rishikesh Kamath, Associate Vice President, Product Management and Marketing, NetMagic. Rishikesh heads the private cloud and managed services practice at NetMagic, an NTT communications company. He is responsible for evangelizing, development, and go-to-market of global managed services, managed security services, and private cloud portfolio. Prior to joining NetMagic, Rishikesh has worked with Tata Consultancy Services in multiple roles ranging from program management to ITSM consulting. An MBA graduate from XLRI Jamshedpur, Rishikesh is an amateur astronomer. So without any more delay, participants, I'll invite Rishikesh to give his presentation. Over to you, Rishikesh.
Okay, thank you so much, Yashwendra. So, good afternoon, participants, and a very warm welcome from our side. And thanks, Yashwendra, for that introduction. So, yes, as you rightly mentioned, the cybersecurity landscape today is one which is fraught with multiple risks, and every so often we see headlines being made in terms of data breaches, in terms of new risks being introduced, in terms of penalties being imposed, right? So in this constantly evolving, constantly changing world, how is it that an organization can future-proof their cybersecurity programs? So this webinar, and in the course of the next 30 to 35 minutes, I will aim to take you through that, through the journey in terms of what we have seen our customers go through, in terms of what we feel organizations should be looking at. And at the end of it, I would really welcome and appreciate your feedback, your questions pertaining to the cybersecurity related issues that you're facing, or for that matter, even any best practices that you could be following and you would like to share with us. So that said, let me move on. I hope everybody is able to see the slide, and this is just to give you or to set the context in terms of what exactly are the cybersecurity challenges that we face today, right? So first and foremost, the attack tools are getting commoditized, and the attacks themselves are becoming increasingly complex. What this means is today you could have a laptop and simply download a virtual box, have a Metasploit running on it, have a Kali Linux run on it, and you could simply reuse all of the code that other hackers have written and launch your own attacks, right? And at the same time, you could modify them to an extent where it becomes difficult for the attacked organization to detect those particular threats. So this particular trend, where the entire thing has been democratized in terms of the tools being available to the different stakeholders, whether it is the good guys or the bad guys, is something that is a game changer in the entire cybersecurity landscape, right? And then to complicate things, the technology landscape itself is rapidly changing. There are workloads everywhere. You have workloads in cloud, you have workloads in your data center, you even have workloads where you don't know where your workloads could be, right? So most of the times we found that CIOs and CISOs are left with a lot of egg on their face when they realize that their marketing teams or their finance teams have taken SaaS-based services and really gone ahead and expanded the enterprise landscape or the enterprise area without their specific approval, right? Without adhering to any enterprise guidelines. So the technology landscape is changing. You have Dockers, you have containers, you have the different big data technologies, and all of that is really complicating things, right? Getting breached has become an accepted fact of life. I think it's gone are the days when people used to think about protecting the perimeter and making sure that people don't come into your network. The fact of life today is you're already breached, whether you like it or not. It's just that you're probably not detected that breach yet. So the whole story now is about how fast you are able to detect that breach and how quickly are you able to react to it and take remedial actions around that around those breaches, right? Uh, Training, hiring, and retaining cybersecurity skills for all of you leaders out there who've tried to do this. You must have experienced a huge pain when it comes to hiring the right kind of talent at the right kind of cost, and then being able to retain that talent and cross train that talent across different technologies. Right, so that is a skills gap which is definitely prevalent, and that is something that is definitely impacting the delivery of security services to organizations, right? Then we talk about statutory compliance, right? So statutory compliance requirements are growing, whether it is in India, whether it is SEBI, whether it is RBI, IRDA. Everybody's really now growing with their compliance requirements, and this has been in place in the global markets with EU's GDPR or the PCI compliances, the HIPAA compliances, and all of that. But now it's definitely seeing a good growth in India as well. So if the carrot has not worked for companies, the stick definitely is going to work. And then how do you solve all of these problems, right? So obviously you need solution providers. Obviously you need product developers or companies with their own products who will be able to solve these problems for you. But then again, there's a problem which is specific to the cybersecurity field, which is that there is a problem of plenty. There are a multitude of solution providers, right? Whether it is product providers, whether it is service providers, thereby making it difficult to choose for organizations which is the right partner to go with, or what is the right mix of partners to go with. So what do we mean by future proofing your cybersecurity, right? If I were to put it in one line, it would mean executing a cybersecurity program that constantly evolves to address the changing threat landscape, right? So that's great. We've defined what future proofing your cybersecurity means. But then how do we go about achieving it, right? And that's really the whole crux of this next 30 minutes, the whole idea behind this webinar. So the first and foremost thing is identifying the right decision models and evaluating the best choice for your organization. And I will get into a little bit details of the decision models that I'm talking about, right? But you need to go through these decisions, X versus Y. And some of these are legacy choices compared to the new age choices that one would need to make. Okay. Then identifying the key performance indicators for your cybersecurity program. So it's not just important to say that, okay, we are going to put in tools and we're going to put in people and processes to solve it, right? You need to ensure what is it that you are expecting in terms of performance, in terms of results out of the program, right? So identifying the key KPIs for your program are absolutely essential. Then we talk about evaluating your security controls on the maturity curve. So what we recommend to customers is a cybersecurity maturity curve. And that is a curve which starts from the basic level of products being deployed at customer locations, all the way up to advanced proactive predictive solutions, right? So I'll speak a little bit about that curve in the forthcoming slides. and we'll talk about what kind of different products one can expect to see. Obviously, it's indicative in nature, right? But although generalized, it does fit a majority of the organizations. Then evaluating the performance and maturity of your SOC itself, right? So the people, the processes within the SOC, what is the performance or what is the maturity of that team? What is the maturity of the processes that you've put in place? Okay. And finally, while you've decided what tools to go with, what people to go with, what kind of KPIs to deal with, what kind of decisions to make, the final thing you need to think about is how or where do we implement these security solutions, right? So there are different options around those, and typically we recommend a multi-layered implementation of security solutions to help customers achieve the best out of their cybersecurity investments. Okay, so here are the decision models that I was talking about. Decision X versus decision Y. So here, let's take the first one, on-premise solutions versus cloud-based solutions. In the legacy world, most of customers typically go for on-premise solutions, whether it is deploying perimeter-based security solutions, whether it is in terms of deploying SOC-related SIM solutions, or whether it is in terms of, let's say, protecting your digital assets, DDoS protection, application protection, what have you, right? So the decision was more towards on-premise solutions. The question is, does that hold true today as well? Okay, so when you start on your journey in terms of your cybersecurity investments or the program, the first decision that you will need to make is whether we should go for on-premise or whether we should go for cloud-based solutions. And quite honestly, most of the times the answer could be a mix of the two, right? A complete cloud solution may not suit certain organizations, a complete on-premise may not suit certain organizations, right? So a mix is something that would work. Depending on the nature of your organization, it will determine what which is the more heavier side, right? Whether the on-premise heavier or the cloud-based one is heavier. Okay. Then the next decision to make is CapEx investments versus OpEx contracts, right? So if you make CapEx investments, the risk that organizations run today is that the technology landscape, the threat landscape, that's changing really fast. So what exists today uh, may become completely just a redundant thing in a matter of just maybe 18 months or 24 months, right? So do you want to really go ahead and invest in capex and not have that option of changing something in the future, right? So capex versus opex contracts, that's something we've seen our customers make decisions about, right? Third is a captive SOC versus an outsourced SOC. So do you really want to have all the people and the processes hired on your own, on your payrolls, and being run by yourself, right? Is that really your core competency? Are you a security organization? Are you a cybersecurity product company? Are you is that something which drives business for you, right? And if the answer is no, then you should be very, very clearly looking out for an outsourced SOC program. Then product features versus solution capabilities. So more often than not, OEMs pitch for their product capabilities to customers, right? So this decision model is about being a bit neutral in terms of trying to understand what are the capabilities that that particular solution will offer to you. Capabilities on a standalone basis, capabilities in terms of being able to work with other solutions that are being currently deployed or already in place. So product features in of itself versus solution capabilities, because some some organizations or some let's say product companies might be very good at one particular thing. I mean, they could be the best in class in that one particular thing, but then does that really suit your organization? Is that something that is necessary? Are you really willing to pay a hefty price for getting all of those features, of which you may probably end up using 20, 25 or max 30% of features, right? So product features versus solution capabilities is what one should look at. Then reacting to incidents versus proactive hunting. So this is going back to the fact that you have to accept that you're already breached. So reacting to incidents would mean that you're still waiting for somebody to announce that they've breached your organization, somebody to publicly go out and post your data and those kind of things, and then you would react to it. Whereas in a proactive manner, you would assume that you're already breached, and then you would go out and do some proactive hunting or some soul searching in terms of using the existing tools that you have, and try to find out if what is the level of breach that is already there in the organization, right? And the whole idea is to kind of get that breach level down to a minimum acceptable one. And finally, decision between siloed operations versus integrated solutions. Okay, so the IT organization in terms of the system administrators, database administrators generally work in silos, and the security organization is a separate part of the either the IT story or maybe as a separate security team, right? And more often than not, they end up not talking to each other unless there is a blame game to happen, right? So the decision to make here is whether you want to continue that kind of siloed operations in order to be efficient. Will that help you remain efficient? Will that help you manage things more effectively? Or can you look at an integrated approach, integration in terms of processes? For example, having a common service management layer across your security and systems infrastructure towers, having common automation tools or AI tools across both these towers. So siloed operations versus integrated solutions. That said, let's look at some of the security metrics. I mentioned that we have to look at the key performance indicators or the metrics basically. So the first one is visibility. How is this relevant to your security posture? So in visibility, we talk about, do you know what you own, right? Unless you know what you own, you will not be able to do an analysis, do a risk analysis around it, and you will not be able to take the necessary preventive measures to detect and prevent additional threats, right? So, but that's just one part of the visibility. The other part of visibility is, do you know your threat as well? Okay. Obviously, you have the mass threats that that are very opportunistic in nature, but then increasingly the threats have become very targeted as well. So you now have APT actors, you now have state actors who are specifically targeting a particular organization. Okay, so do you know who's talking about you? Do you know who's really behind your life? Do you know who's really behind making your life miserable from a security standpoint? Then detection. So this relates to comprehensive security monitoring both within and outside. So unless you're able to encompass all of the areas of your assets and put some level of security monitoring around it, you will end up with missing some of the areas. You'll end up with some gaps, and those gaps are the ones that will ultimately lead to breaches. Okay, so security monitoring, most important in the sense that it has to be done both within and outside the organization. And let me explain what I mean by outside the organization, right? So sometime back on the first slide, I talked about the the shadow IT being formed, right? So how do you really track what is not within your own control, right? That thing which is already out there but creates a risk for you, right? So for example, we've had cases where the customer's marketing team have outsourced a particular website to a different third party, and they've gone and hosted on a cloud, and that asset was not protected behind a WAF, and it got breached, and ultimately it was the customer's brand that got impacted, right? Whereas the CIO or the CISO had absolutely no knowledge of that happening, right? So a comprehensive security monitoring approach both within and outside is absolutely necessary to be able to detect your threat landscape, to be able to detect the threats that are on them, and to be able to detect the various issues that could happen in the future around them. So all of these, detection systems create a lot of noise, create a lot of output. Okay, so the next one metric you need to have in mind before you start on your program is fidelity, which is finding the needle in the haystack. So how do you sift through the different alerts? How do you sift through the volume of alerts, and then make a decision on a specific threat or a specific alert which is being seen out there? Then the next one we talk about is the response capabilities. So once the incident has happened, your ability to be able to respond to that, right? So let's say a worm ransomware outbreak happens. Okay, so then how are you placed to mitigate that security incident? How are you responding to that security incident? How fast can you respond to that security incident? How is the next one, which is the speed, right? So how fast can you respond to the incident? How fast can you restrict and contain the damage to a minimum, right? And finally, the last metric is resiliency, where the preparedness to which talks about the preparedness to run business as usual after an incident actually happens. So that's got more to do with the kind of policies and procedures that you would normally put in place. So this is the maturity curve that we talked about. And this is, if you see, we've plotted different different capabilities around this, right? So most organizations that start at the bottom of the curve would typically have an antivirus, IDS, IPS, next generation firewall, or a proxy, or even an SIEM in place, right? And the whole context around this is the signature based detection or heuristics based detection, right? So this is about detecting the known threats, right? But that's the I would call the first level of maturity, and hopefully most organizations today are already past that thing, right? So when we move up from that, we need to have solutions like advanced threat protection, endpoint detection and response, building UEBA capabilities to detect insider threats, threat intelligence platforms. So all of these gives an organization the capability to respond to the next generation threats, right? So the second phase is more to do with response, is more to do with being able to respond faster and more effectively, and manage the incidents and manage the threats that occur on your infrastructure, right? But obviously there is room for improvement beyond that as well, and that's where we talk about predictive and proactive security. So that's where we have threat intelligence, data analytics, use of decoy and deception tools, network forensics, the hunting for advanced persistent threats. So these are tools, and these are areas which help to which help customers detect in advance of an existing threat, or kind of identify those threats which are lying below the radar, or have a large dwell time, right? So the higher level of SOC maturity, where you have deception technologies, where you have hunting programs in place, help you to identify those more quickly, right? So this curve is an indicative curve in nature, and some organizations have already started at the journey and slowly progress on this. Some other organizations possibly have nothing in place today and can jump directly to the higher levels of maturity, right? So this curve is not to say that one has to start at the bottom and then grow from there, but it is a framework where you can then look at what are the tools that you have deployed in your organization, what are the products or what are the capabilities you have deployed in your organization, map it to this particular curve, and then figure out where your organization is from a security capability perspective or a security maturity perspective. So while the previous one talked about the security solutions in itself, now we talk about the maturity levels of the SOC. So we could classify the SOC maturity levels into three areas, right? A developing SOC, an experienced SOC, and an advanced SOC. So a developing SOC would typically take care of just the compliance, log management. They would have processes, but there would be limited processes like incident management or change management. And more often than not, they would be reactive in nature. So they would be firefighting most of the times on incidents that happen, right? Whereas an experienced SOC would be operationally efficient. It would have improved on the processes and matured on the processes and put in processes like major incident management, security incident management, problem management around it. They would have automated alerting and reporting, and also they would be more metrics driven. So that would help the it would help customers, or it will help the organization to actually monitor or evaluate or quantify the output of that SOC, right? So when you have specific metrics in place, it helps you quantify the output of that SOC, right? So an experienced SOC will help you do that. And an advanced SOC is where you have predictive output, right? So one can by having an advanced SOC, one can tell in a predictive manner what kind of threats could actually be lurking in your network, or what kind of threat actors could be targeting you in the near future, and so on and so forth, right? So it is predictive. There is an operational excellence, which basically means that the processes are working in harmony. The advanced SOC is working in harmony with the rest of the organization, right? And the in an advanced SOC, we have also seen that most of the output is risk driven, right? So the so there is a weightage given to the risk associated with each asset, and then accordingly the alerts are measured, or accordingly the alerts are worked upon, right? So that's what would be typically called as an advanced SOC. So how does one go from upgrading to a regular SOC to a next generation SOC, right? So on one hand, you see the traditional SOC parameter, and on the other hand, parameters which need to be augmented, or parameters which can augment the traditional SOC parameters, right? So you have, let's say the first thing is incident management. So in a traditional SOC, which is a probably even an experienced SOC for that matter, would have incident management in place, right? But an advanced SOC would have that incident management augmented by case management. So case management helps you in ways that you can collaborate better with your different teams. And security incidents typically require that kind of coordination across the systems team, database teams, network teams. So case management helps you to do that. Case management would help you to quickly look up a particular issue and find its relevance in the global community, find its relevance from a global threat point of view. It would help you pivot from a particular point and deep dive and search much faster and in a more intuitive manner compared to traditional incident management. So augmenting incident management by case management is something we highly recommend to our customers. Then generic threat intelligence, which is augmented by targeted and private threat intelligence. So generic threat intelligence is basically your globally blacklisted IP addresses, domains, IOAs, IOCs, which are available through multiple threat intelligence feeds. And while that is necessary, we think that that needs to be augmented with targeted private threat intelligence. So private threat intelligence is about who are the actors who are engaging with my infrastructure, what kind of credentials are they using to break into my network, right? So when you have that kind of threat intelligence, you are able to take actions much faster. Penetration testing, which is more or less a given these days, that needs to be augmented by red teaming exercises. So red teaming can be done to measure the effectiveness of your SOC itself, or it could be done to measure the effectiveness of your cybersecurity program across the enterprise, right? In terms of doing social engineering attacks, in terms of doing physical break-ins, and all of that things. Then policy-based detection, typically in SIEMs, which would be augmented by threat hunting, right? So policy will only help you detect the known threats, possibly even the known unknowns at some point in time. But threat hunting would also help you target the unknown unknowns, right? And this is where you get a bit creative in nature, and you try and think about all different hypotheses, all different scenarios, and then go into the hunting mode and try and find out what is already there on the network. I mean, the infrastructure, right? Siloed operations versus integration of monitoring tools. Most customers don't buy everything at once. They would have bought things over a phase period of time, and then those would be operated in an individual siloed manner. So it's important that that needs to be augmented with integration of the two monitoring tools, the security monitoring tools themselves, whether it is integration through a SOAR platform, whether it is integration through an SIEM tool, but that needs definitely to be integrated. Offline playbooks, which most customers have in place, which tell them what to do when a particular incident happens. The SOC analyst would have L1 level of playbooks, L2 level of playbooks, and so on. But while these offline playbooks serve some purpose, for the playbooks to be more effective, it's important that these are orchestrated, or these are fed into a SOAR platform, so that the playbooks can be run at the click of a button. Those playbooks can be in terms of either fetching information or actually going and taking actions on the different endpoints or the different perimeter devices or different security solutions. And finally, on-premise analysis versus cloud-based data crunching. So when it comes to detecting the next generation of threats or new age threats, while you have already a huge amount of information available, crunching all of that information on-premise could become challenge for certain types of organizations, right? So that needs to be augmented with cloud-based data crunching, and the cloud almost offers you limitless capabilities. And one should definitely look at leveraging the cloud-based solutions from a scalability point of view. So the metrics we spoke about, how does one go ahead with achieving those metrics? So for the visibility, we recommend that you take an outside-in approach, which basically means that you take the view of an attacker, and you look for everything that could go wrong from the outside. So don't restrict yourself to the assets that are identified, or to the assets that are known, to the, let's say, in a very taking a very specific example, do not restrict yourself to the IP address range that an organization uses, right? Because in today's SaaS-based world, you could definitely have a your enterprise landscape already extending beyond your traditional IP address ranges, right? So make sure that you take an outside-in approach when it comes to visibility. From a detection standpoint, integrate different point solutions so you get more context into those into the alerts that come from individual solutions, and at the same time leverage threat intelligence. From a fidelity standpoint, leverage big data technologies, machine learning technologies that can help you crunch data much faster, that can help you sift through the volumes of data, and especially look for tools that have a more intuitive interface, in which you could write queries which are not programmatic or software related or software code related type of queries, but they could be more natural in terms of language, right? So look for tools that can help you provide that. When it comes to response, preventive controls, cloud solutions, industry collaborations, all of these are solutions that can help you improve your response, your metrics around your response capabilities. For speed, it is definitely recommended that one puts in automation and orchestration solutions, and the automation orchestration could be either individual solutions or typically a SOAR type of platform that would be able to respond to issues much faster, right? And then the cloud solutions themselves, obviously cloud also by virtue of fact that it does not touch your enterprise, helps you deal with incidents and threats much faster, right? And keep those things out before it actually impacts you. And finally, resiliency, which is about how do you recover after you've already landed up with the breach on your hands. So that's through more software controls like policies, processes, regular drills, very essential to identify what is the response or what is the reaction of the rest of the organization when something has been brought to notice. So drills and red team exercises, right? All of these help achieve higher levels of values on the resiliency metric. So finally, when we talk about metrics and we talked about the products and we talked about the SOC maturity and all of that, right? At what levels can you go and implement these security controls? So the way we see this is we can implement security controls in three levels. One is within the data center itself. Second is at the perimeter of the data center or at the perimeter of the service provider like NetMagic or in the cloud. Okay, so in the data center you can have on-premise solutions like on-premise DDoS protection, anti-malware, FAME map control which sits on your servers. You can have SIEM and analytics which are within your data center, especially if you do not want the logs and information traveling outside the network. You can have the web application firewall, which is close to your web property within the data center. Although it may not be a solution for all, because if you are an e-commerce company, if you are a media company for whom the volume of traffic is fairly large, an on-premise within the data center solution for WAF may not really be meeting your business requirements. Then VA and PT of the network and applications within the environment, decoys and deception tools, both within the data center as well as within the enterprise LAN, and finally privileged ID management solutions to take care of user-related tracking, auditing, and access. Then at the perimeter, you could leverage the upstream DDoS protection services that your service provider would give you. You could put in next generation firewall, UTM, IPS, email security, secure web gateways, right? NTA tools, network traffic analysis tools, which are sitting at the egress point, and even network DLP solutions, right? So that could be at the perimeter. And finally, at the cloud, where you can look at solutions like cloud-based DDoS protection or cloud-based web application firewalls, cloud-based DNS protection, bot prevention, secure web gateways which are cloud-based, and a solution around the detection of threats from outside the network, which is exposure monitoring. So all of these solutions which run from the cloud and help you kind of respond faster. It will help you scale, right? Especially solutions like WAF, DNS, and DDoS, they will help you scale much better. So the point is, you don't need to go in for all the three levels, right? And neither do you need to restrict yourself to one single level. Depending on your organization, depending on your business requirements, you may need to go in for one or a mix of all, right? We have multiple cases where customers have taken either just within the data center and solution, and everything is hosted within as an on-premise in the data center. And at this same time, we have customers who have taken some solutions on-premise and the rest of the things from the cloud, right? And this ties back to the initial areas that we spoke about, which is the decision models, right? One of the decisions was whether to go in for the dead on-premise solutions or to go in for cloud-based solutions, right? So that's an evaluation that you need to do for your own organization, for your own business context, and then arrive at a conclusion. So having gone through all of that, I just wanted to kind of take just 2 minutes and quickly give you a brief about EntityCom NetMagic. So we are a company where maybe most of you would know us for the cloud and co-location services, but we have almost 20 plus service lines specific to cybersecurity solutions, and it covers all of the areas that I spoke about through this webinar. Obviously, we continue with our legacy of the data centers, our public cloud grades, and all of that technology expertise. We are also, as part of EntityCom NetMagic, we are also part of the global entity community or the global entity organization, and that gives us access to a global group of cyber specialists, whether it is the likes of Solutionary in the Americas, or whether it's the likes of Earthwave in APAC, or Entity Security globally. Right, so we work very closely with all of the group companies from at a global scale, and that really helps us develop or deliver much more value add to our customers. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening in. Yashwendra, I would like to hand it over to you, and if there are any questions, we could discuss them now.
Thank you very much, Rishikesh, for that wonderful presentation. Yes, we have several questions coming from our participants. So the first question is, what is the role of the SOC customer, which is the organization, in implementation of advanced SOC?
The role of the SOC customer in implementation of the advanced SOC. So again, here, if I understand the question correctly, I think you're trying to ask whether an organization should go ahead and implement the advanced SOC on their own, or whether they should be looking at a separate, third party. So there are different ways to evaluate that, and then again, there is no one single answer to it. You have to look at what really best fits your organization. There are different pros and cons associated with either an captive versus an outsourced SOC, right? So in a captive SOC, obviously you will be able to customize things to the nth level, and you will be able to integrate all of those SOC capabilities with the rest of their organization down to the level which you feel, and you'll have total control of that SOC, or at least a sense of control of that particular captive team, right? But on the other hand, if you have outsourced the SOC, you will get access to best practices. You will get access to the global threats that the outsourced SOC player is observing, right? You will be able to see issues that the SOC provider is seeing across all of its other customers, which you would not be otherwise able to do if you would have had a captive SOC, or maybe do it in a limited manner, right? So if you are a very large enterprise and you can afford to invest time and effort and money into that, because obviously since the technology keeps changing, one needs to constantly have the right kind of skills, right kind of mix, right? So if you can afford to have that kind of an investment put in place without impacting your core competencies, then yes, definitely, a captive SOC is something for you, and the captive SOC can then be grown to become an advanced or a mature SOC. If not, if you really want to future-proof your cybersecurity investments, if you really want to remain agile, then you should be looking at an outsourced SOC provider, and you should be driving them towards getting towards a higher level of maturity.
Yeah, thank you, Rishikesh. The next question is, what are the requirements for setting up an advanced SOC?
Okay, so if I could actually go back to my slides, are my slides still on, Yashandra?
Yes, Rishikesh.
Okay, great. So if I could go back, yeah. So to set up an advanced SOC, whether you call it advanced SOC, whether you call it next generation SOC, whatever it is, right? This is the one slide that I spoke about, and I think this captures a good amount of the things that one would need to do to move to an advanced SOC, right? This is assuming that you already have something in place today, and how do you augment those capabilities, right? So you look at incident management, you look at threat intelligence, you look at penetration testing, you look at all of these parameters, and then you augment them with additional tools, additional capabilities, additional processes to move to the next level, right? Honestly, that is a topic which is so detailed that I may not be able to do justice by answering that by referring to one slide. So my apologies if this does not completely answer your question, but at least I've tried to put in place what we recommend to our customers today, what we observe in our customers' environment today in terms of moving to an advanced level of SOC.
Sure, Rishikesh. Next participant wants to know, would you recommend open source tools for security checks?
Okay. Open source tools definitely have their pros and cons. The pros of that is, I mean, leaving the cost thing aside, but the pros are that it has been vetted by a larger community of developers, right? So it does have that advantage. But it also means that you yourself need to put in a lot of efforts into either implementing it or supporting it, right? And let's say you want to get some features like reporting, right? Advanced reporting. You may not get it out of the box if it's an open source solution. Okay, you may need to put your own development efforts into it to get the right level of reporting or right level of analytics from that particular tool. If you're willing to invest into that time and effort, if you have a development team in place to do that, by all means, that is something that can be looked at. If not, then obviously either an open source tool which is supported by a commercial subscription service is recommended, or a fully fledged commercial tool in itself would be recommended. So you need to take a call depending on the existing tools in your environment, and the amount of time and effort that you are willing to invest into that particular thing. I'll give an example of our own organization, not specific to security, but in the infrastructure monitoring space. We decided some time back to leverage NAGOS as one of the platforms. And NAGOS is an open source platform, right? Now we have a fairly strong engineering team, an R&D team, and we were able to put the might of that engineering team behind developing customized reports, customized dashboards, customized modules around the NAGOS platform, right? So while we used open source, we were able to invest time and effort around that, and get much more value out of it. If that is a thing that your organization enjoys today, by all means, one can definitely look at open source tools. I'm not making statement that open source is better than commercial or commercial is better than open source. You definitely need to look at this investment that I spoke about, and just like one would evaluate 2 or 3 products from any OEMs, you could evaluate an open source tool as well, and check it on the number of parameters.
Sure, Rishikesh. So we have another question from one of the participants. He wants to know, what should a CIO or a CISO look for in a MSS partner?
Okay, so I think the what a CIO or an CISO should be looking at is the maturity level of that MSS partner in terms of the different tools that they're using, in terms of the different processes that they are using. let's say, in terms, for example, one of the things could be, from a process perspective, one of the things could be, how does the service provider respond when there is an alert that comes up? Okay, is there an automated nature through which the alert can be first determined to be a false positive, or something that can be driven off with a quick check, or then highlighted or escalated to a higher level of analyst, right? So how quickly can the provider really do that? So that would be a measure of the maturity of the processes within the MSS provider, right? So maturity of the processes within the MSSP, the different kind of tools that the MSSP provider would have given, the amount of flexibility in integrating with the customer's environment. Okay, because MSS providers obviously run shared services, and when one runs shared services, there are certain amount of standardization that one needs to bring in, right? And which means that there is some amount of friction when it comes to integrating with the customer's environment, right? So what is the level of maturity there in terms of integrating with your environment, right? That is something that you should talk with the MSS provider and check how flexible the MSS provider is in being able to really deliver that. And finally, I think you should also look at the different commercial models that are available from them, and you should try and protect yourself by, if you're a growing organization, you could look at an asset-based commercial model. If you are already a fairly mature, large-size organization, you could look at a scope of work-based, fixed price kind of commercial model, right? So you should evaluate the MSS provider based on the different types of commercial models and the flexibility that they provide within those commercial models.
Sure, Rishikesh. So the next question is, how strongly do you recommend that a SOC provider and CSP are independent players?
Okay. Well, a cloud service provider and a SOC provider, function two separate things, right? Even if they are from the same service provider, I mean, the same service provider having cloud services as well as security services, I don't really see that as a big challenge, quite honestly. As long as you're able to measure the service provider on their capabilities around cloud as well as the capabilities around security services. So I really don't think there should be any particular cause of concern to think that a CSP should be completely different from a security or an MSSP provider.
Right, Rishikesh. So we have time for one last question before we end this session. So the last question for you is, for mid-size industry, how important is SIEM tool? Is it really necessary for a mid-size organization to have one?
Okay, that probably is a more definitive answer. Yes, it is very important even for a mid-sized organization to have an SIEM solution in place. Now the question is, how do you really deploy that, right? Do you purchase a tool on your own, or do you take it as a service? Okay. Are you a mid-sized organization in a heavily regulated industry? Are you a BFSI or a bank, a mid-sized bank which needs continuous audits from RBI, or are you an insurance company where the IRDA guidelines apply? Are you a broker where the SEBI guidelines apply, right? So if you are in a heavily regulated industry, having an SIEM tool is a no-brainer, or requiring an SIEM tool is a no-brainer, right? Absolutely, it is necessary. And even if you're not in the regulated industry, we would definitely recommend customers to have that at least an SIEM in place, because like we saw in the maturity curve, if I could go back to this, yeah. So an SIEM is really at the very basic level of security maturity. So if you're serious about having some level of security monitoring in place, then an SIEM in terms of either a service or as a capex investment, if it suits you, is definitely recommended. Mid-sized organizations, capex may not be possible, so they should look at cloud-based services on SIEM.
Thank you, Rishikesh. With this, we would like to wrap up this session. Thanks a lot again, Rishikesh, for that wonderful presentation and your amazing answers to all the questions. And thank you, all participants, for taking time off and being here in this session. Thank you very much, and have a great evening ahead.
Thank you, Yashwindra, and thank you, everyone.